Hi, welcome to my channel, Math Made Easy with Laurel. I'm Laurel, and in this video we're going to continue talking about the scientific calculator, Texas Instrument 30XA. In the previous video, I introduced the Texas Instrument 30XA and explained that it was the calculator that's used on the Journeyperson exam in Saskatchewan for all apprentice groups. And we talked about the fraction function, the order of operations of the calculator, powers and roots, and using the memory function. So if you haven't watched that video yet, I suggest you do that first. In this video, we're going to talk about angles and trig functions and inverse trig functions. So if you're a machinist or a plumber or a pipe fitter, you're going to want to know how these functions work. Before we take a look at using the trig functions or the angle functions, I want to point out this key right here, which is DRG. You will notice a little DEG showing up on the display of your calculator, and that represents an angle measured in degrees. There are other units that angles can be measured in. If we press this button, you'll notice that that DEG disappears and we have instead RAD. That represents radians, which is another unit used to measure angles. If we press it again, it changes to GRAD, which is gradians, another unit of angular measurement. You're only going to be working in degrees, so let's go back to degrees. It's a good idea to make sure you are in degrees anytime you're going to be using the trig functions. It won't affect any other operations, but it will make a huge difference with your trig functions. Luckily, when you turn off your calculator and then turn it back on, degree will be the default mode. So if it accidentally gets in a different mode, once you turn it on again, it will correct itself. Let's take a look at using the trig functions. We have three of them: sine, cosine, and tangent. So in our first example, if you were asked to find the sine of 30 degrees, you enter the angle first, so 30, and then you enter your trig function, sine. So the sine of 30 degrees is equal to 0.5. The next example says find the cos of 42.8 degrees. So again, we enter the angle, 42.8, and then we press the cos function. So the cosine of 42.8 degrees is 0.7337, and so on. If we're asked to find the tangent of an angle, in this case tangent of 22.5 degrees, enter the angle, and then press tangent. And the tangent function would be 0.4142. Now sometimes you're going to be given the ratio and you're going to be asked to find the angle. And that's going to be a different function than sine. If you know the ratio and you're asked to find the angle, what you're going to have to do is find the inverse sine. So A will be equal to the inverse sine of 0.5. In order to find the inverse sine function, you have to look at the second function of sine, and above the sine function, it's sine -1. So to get that function, you need to use your second function. My calculator is an older model, so I have a yellow second function and yellow writing. You probably have green and green writing. So now to find the inverse sine of 0.5, I enter 0.5 or just 0.5, and then I go second function sine. So what this function does is it finds the angle when we know the ratio. Well, we already know sine of 30 degrees is 0.5 because we did it earlier, but now we're saying what angle gives us a sine of 0.5? 30 degrees. I do the same thing for my next example. If cos of b is 0.8, then b will equal the inverse cos of 0.8. So I enter 0.8 and then inverse cos. So the angle whose cos is 0.8 is 36.9 degrees. Same idea with the last question. If I know the tangent of some angle I'm calling C is 1.25, in order to find C, I have to go the inverse tan of 1.25. So I enter 1.25, inverse tan. And my angle would be 51.34 degrees. If you ever have to change from decimal degrees to degrees, minutes, or seconds, or degrees, minutes, seconds to decimal degrees, your calculator will do that for you, and I'll show you where those functions are. So let's take a look at our first example. Change 32.3 degrees to degrees, minutes, and seconds. So if you take a look above the equal sign, it has a DD, arrow, DMS. That means decimal degrees to degrees, minutes, seconds. So we're going to enter 32.3, and then it's a second function. So second function equals, and that angle would be 32 degrees, 18 minutes, and 0 seconds. So that's the symbol for degree, that's the symbol for minutes, and that's the symbol for seconds. If you need to change from degrees, minutes, seconds to decimal degrees, then you're going to use the function above the plus sign. It's DMS, which is degrees, minutes, seconds, to decimal degrees, DD. It's a little awkward entering this because you actually have to use your decimal point, even though this is not decimal degrees. So the way you do it is you enter 62, and then after your degrees, you press decimal. Then the next 2 digits have to be your minutes. So in this case, we have 30, but if I only had 5, you'd have to put 0.5. Then the next 2 digits has to be your seconds, 45. We want to change that to decimal degrees, so second function, the plus sign, and there it is, 62.5125 degrees. There are other functions on your calculator, but I think that we've covered the majority of the functions that you're going to be using in your trade.